Bless the Lord, O my soul, blessed art thou, Lord.
Once again, I'm sitting here with my dear friend since the 1980s. What was your name again? Father
My
Mark.
name Jose Jimenez. Remember that?
Yes. Well, anyway, we've been friends for a very long time. And earlier today, we took a drive around Vashon Island and had a long discussion, and I decided that it would be a good one to continue for the benefit of those people who watch Abbot Tryphon on a regular basis. It's a real delight to have you here, Father.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here, Father.
One of the things that we were discussing early on was the importance of making the church available to people that we come in contact with. And in an age of so much confusion, gender confusion and all other kinds of confusion, where young kids in grade school even are encouraged to decide whether they're in the right gender or not. And then England, why don't you mention that about what happened in England just recently?
Yes, you're referring to the article I discovered today and shared with you. Yeah, the article about the fact that the NHS in England has now officially banned hormonal therapy and surgical mutilation of children in an attempt to align their concepts of their gender with their actual biological sex. The NHS looked at the facts according to this article and found that those procedures that are very common now in many Western countries did more harm than good. And so the NHS has banned those kinds of therapies in cases of so-called sexual dysphoria for children, which is a good thing because the fact is, contrary to the transitional propaganda, it is doing a lot more harm than good.
It reminds me of back in the 90s when I was still, actually in the 80s when I was still in Berkeley. And I was working as a therapist, and I had a young woman come to me for counseling. And it took a couple of weeks before this really beautiful young blonde woman revealed that she was transitioning from male to female. And she was married, and she said that her wife loved her enough that they decided to stay together. And I asked her, I said, does this mean you are now considering yourselves in a lesbian situation? And she said, well, I guess so. Years later, when I had moved to Portland, I was in downtown Portland, and a young man came up to me, a young blonde man, and he said, I haven't seen you in years, but you probably don't recognize me. And it turned out that that young woman had changed her mind and decided to go back to being a male. And his wife was still with him, and his wife was the one that really encouraged him to reclaim his manhood. And then he told me that during the time that he was seeing me as a therapist, that it was a very difficult time for him. And one of the things that it reminded me of at the time was that in the psychological world, it is commonly known that the human brain is not fully developed until the age of 26. Mm-hmm. And so if this is the case, why do we have people today thinking that children, little children, are at a brain level that they can make such a decision that's ultimately going to be changing their lives forever, and in many ways ruining their lives? Young girls that will no longer be able to give birth. Young boys that think they're girls, but then find out that they're men, and it's too late. as they'd grown older, become more mature. And then I've already heard about cases of young people who had the transition take place are now suing hospitals and even their parents for allowing this to happen.
Mm-hmm. There's a very good website for people who are confused about that called Transition Regret. I forget the name of the fellow whose website that is, but he was a man who lived for decades, having gone through the chemical and other kinds of procedures, lived for decades as a woman, appearing as a woman, I should say, not as a woman, because there's no possible change, actually, biologically or genetically, which is the core of our reality, our being. But nevertheless, he came out of that and has a website, Transition Regret, where he has many, many other people that have been contributing their experiences to his website. And I would highly recommend that for people who are concerned about these matters. Because the reality is, our sex is not merely a surface appearance. It's not only external, so-called secondary sexual characteristics, patterns of body hair, genitalia, etc., mammary glands, whatever. But it is in the genetic code of our being. From the moment of conception, that ovum is either male or female. And that distinction determines the actual development of the fetus. It triggers the kind of hormonal environment that the fetus develops in, which influences the development of the brain and nervous system, the skeletal system, the other organs of the body. All of those things are developed slowly within a context of what the hormonal balance is, determined by the genes. When people have dysphoria, so-called, there are other terms now that they're using because dysphoria is that's a baddie that people don't like to use that. But the reality is, there is a dysphoria. There is a disconnect between one's actual biological reality and what is in one's mind. But none of this stuff can actually go to the heart of the matter of altering the genes that have determined not only the existing sexual characteristics of a person, but the whole period, the whole process of fetal development that is predetermined by that and is conditioned by the genetics. So it's a very superficial and naive approach that people take to sex, their sexual identity.
It's amazing to me when I think about a woman who was being considered as a Supreme Court justice, and she is now. And she was asked straightforward about what is a man, and she couldn't answer it. I mean, unbelievable to me. I understand the difficulties and the sadness that certain people go through. I have a young cousin whose daughter decided that she was really a male and transgendered into supposedly being a male, and then eventually regretted it and tried to go back. But by the time she had gone back, so much medical stuff and surgery had taken place that she hardly looked like the female she would have been.
Yes.
But I remember when we were going to the funeral of her grandmother rather, my aunt, my brother and I, who's a very strong Christian, Dwayne and I decided that even though we were aware that there were certain members of our family that had turned their back on this part of the family because of this, that as Christians we needed to be there and love and support them, not in the idea of transgender or changing their gender, but rather that they're a human being. And all human beings are loved by God, and all of them are we are charged to love everyone and not judge anyone. But in not judging someone doesn't mean that we are bound to say, oh, it's perfectly fine, I'm 100% behind you making this transition. That's not true love, and that's certainly not a Christian love.
Well, you can make an analogy with what if someone is an alcoholic or a drug addict? You care for that person, you're concerned about that person, but you don't say, oh yes, well, you must have been born in that way to be an alcoholic, so you go ahead and drink all that you want, or, oh, you're using cocaine, oh, well, that's fine because you must have an innate need for that, and that's the real you. And this destroys people. The earliest exposure I had to this issue, actually, was in the 1960s when I was in college. When I was in college, I met a man who was a very feminized man and was moving in that direction toward what he thought was a sex change. And I knew enough about him to recognize what happened. His name was Desi at the time. Now who knows where he is now, it's been so many years. Well, Desi's origin, family of origin, consisted of a mother, a grandmother, and 3 sisters. No father. Is there any wonder why he had such a strong identity, identity confusion? There was no man in the family to model manhood for him. And this is the case, I think, you can see it over and over again. We get back to the parent issue, especially the daddy issue. With the lack of the father in the family, things go awry. Boys don't know how to become men. Girls, while they can become women with the example and the nurturing and the relationship with their mother as someone as a role model, nevertheless, then they don't know how to interact with men in a way that is appropriate to them. A father teaches a boy to become a man. A father teaches a daughter what kind of a man to allow into her life.
It's interesting that it is said that girls tend to marry their fathers, so that whatever image their father was giving to them is the very image that they give, that they're looking for when they end up getting married. And I saw that numerous times when I was a therapist, when I would be counseling a woman who was in an abusive relationship. And then when we would delve into that, and we would find out that she grew up with a very abusive, remote father who was abusive to her mother and abusive to his kids, or totally absent from his children's lives. And so, of course, what does she do? She marries a man just like her father. And then this horrible downward cycle continues.
Yeah. One of the youths that I worked with in the 1990s in the juvenile justice system in Florida, I got to know his family, and the mother had maybe 5 or 6 kids. They were living in a short little camper. One day she commented to me, she said, "I don't know what's happening. My 11-year-old girl is developing breasts." Well, the father of the girl wasn't there. But the adult male, there was an adult male. There was a 19-year-old young man who was her boyfriend. And I had, interestingly enough, at some point before that, I had come across a little bit of data somewhere. The pheromones have a function. The pheromone of the father of the girls, apparently, from what I read, retards the onset of puberty in girls. The pheromone of a non-related male accelerates the onset of puberty in young girls. So here's another thing that we're facing with the breakdown of families and people not living in the way that God has intended in whole and wholesome families.
I think all of this leads to the absolute imperative that we priests and bishops be fathers to our parishioners and to the young people. One of the things that I have had at this monastery is we get a steady flow of young men who come here, and many of them coming from dysfunctional families who are embracing Orthodoxy. Some of them even call me grandpa, which I love. I think that's a sweet thing. But the beautiful thing about this is that it gives me that opportunity to be a grandpa to them.
Exactly.
To image masculinity to them, those who didn't have a father in their lives, or whose father was abusive, or whose father was absent, and this is one of the terrible things that we have that is undermining not just family life, but the nation itself, because we now have a nation that has decided to demonize young men, and if they're white, it has to do with their white privilege, which is ridiculous.
So-called.
Yeah, so-called, because I don't know a young man who's white who feels privileged. I told one person, I wish I had known I was privileged when I was young. No one told me.
It would have been nice.
You know.
Yeah.
But the fact is that we need to return to the core of what it means to be a Christian household, with a father that takes care of his family, that a mother that takes care of her children, and that they're bonded together in love. This is one of the reasons why I think, given the state of many of our public schools, that homeschooling is so important, and that for people who are homeschooling their children to network with other people who are homeschooling, because by and large, the families that I've known over the years, both Orthodox and non, who are homeschoolers, have a family with a strong father, a strong mother, who are doing everything traditional for their children.
And the children have a better advantage. Consistently, children who are homeschooled test out higher scores, considerably more higher scores in academic achievement, and also in I think in socialization too. I'm not sure about that.
Yes, absolutely.
And you and I are both having the same experience, as are other clergy we know. We mentioned Father Hans yesterday and his work that he does with young men in Florida. It is that, exactly what you said, it is offering us a privileged opportunity really to be. Here we are monks. Oh, you don't have any children, they say. Oh, no, we do have children. We do have children that come to us. We have spiritual children. And we are fathering and grandfathering.
Father Deacon Ananias in Butte, Montana, he teaches at Carroll College in Montana, a Catholic school. But Father Deacon is one of these who started quite a few years ago, Montanica. And the majority of people that have come to Montanica for these 3 or 4 day conferences are young men. And they're coming there because they are starving for something that's going to fulfill them, that's going to give them meaning to their lives. And these are young men who are not even feeling welcome in universities in this day and age, and who are seen as sort of throwbacks to an age that has passed, when we need as Christians to reclaim the past and to bear it on our shoulders into the future, because that is the true future. And all of the stuff that we're seeing now that is demonizing maleness is coming from the devil. It's a demonic attack against humanity, and it's happening at the very same time that we're seeing a mass exodus from Christianity in the Western world.
Yeah, and so what are we to do as Christians, both clergy and laity? There is a role to play, and that is to reach out and to be not exclusive, not to reject the person with the issues, but to recognize the etiology, the origin of these issues, and to offer to these people the kind of nurturing that can help them to reintegrate or reintegrate their sense of self and reconcile it with the identity, their sex that God has given to them as part of who they will be and who they will find themselves to be in the kingdom of God. We cannot achieve theosis if we are not aware of who we are, and because that determines our relationship with God, who we actually are. And people who are confused about it or deluded even, they can't go forward spiritually. And this is I think this is the most serious part, is that it is a way that the spiritual process of redemption and salvation, which in Orthodox Christianity, salvation is not being a good person to get to go somewhere where everything's going to be just perfect, but it is union with God. It is theosis, God's grace entirely living in us and us living totally in God's divine energy and grace. That cannot be accomplished unless we understand who we are, so that we can relate to God as He's calling us to relate. So I think as our lay people, as well as ourselves, our clergy, we have to be able to be considerate, compassionate, understanding, willing to integrate people, willing to provide the kind of social relationships that help people to discover who they are and what they are, and to be comfortable with it. Because many times it's because of early childhood trauma where children were discouraged in their identity. You know, I had a problem when I was a child, and it was not gender, it was the difference in age, a boy becoming a man. Because of the distance of my father and some early difficulties with peers because of other personal things, characteristics, it was very difficult for me as an adolescent, when I began entering puberty, to envision myself as an adult male. And it took many, many years, and developing healthy relationships with other men is the therapy that's necessary or what is productive.
On that note, Father, it's interesting that there's an article that I read recently about marriages, and that men, by their nature, are their marriages traditionally lasted because men had groups of male friends and women had groups of female friends. And it was oftentimes those different friends that helped them keep their marriage together when they were having a difficulty in a crisis. And we don't have that today. Men, we don't even have, we've seen in our age that if there's an organization that is all male, then there are females that say you can't do that. That's sex discrimination. Mm-hmm. And so Rotary was a good example. At one time it was all male, and now it's mixed. But when we think about it, and then we at the same time allow women to have women's only groups, because that's not sexist, they say.
Yeah.
But what it does is it tells men that it's wrong to even have that male bonding. Exactly. That will give them the strength to live their lives. I was really fortunate because my dad was a golf pro, and my dad was a really loving, supportive man, and he loved my brother and I. And so a lot of whom we became in our own growth was an image of my dad. In fact, I remember when I turned 50 and I looked in the mirror and I said, oh my gosh, I've turned into Dad, because I have my dad's sense of humor. And if you take away the beard and the skufa and the long hair, I look like my dad. But I look at other people that I have known over the years and that have not had that fortunate love that I had, and see the struggles that they have. All of us have struggles, and I think that it's important that as Christians that we be open to everyone, regardless of who they are, regardless of what their proclivities are, what their identity is, and all of that, because the only way that we are going to break that downward spiral into Hades is by loving people into the kingdom and not judging them, but loving them. So if someone identifies as being gay or transgender, we don't judge them, we love them. The Lord tells us that we must love everyone and forgive everyone if we expect to be forgiven. And so all of us have flaws, all of us, especially if we look real carefully. I've had many a night where I can't sleep thinking about, oh my gosh, I can't believe what I know about myself. But we keep on struggling. And in turn, what we need to do is to love other people and accept them where they are. But by accepting them where they are doesn't mean that we are to make our Christian faith and the doctrines of the church and the biblical precepts that we have as Christians null and void, which is what a lot of the denominations are doing now.
I agree. These are essentials to not only spiritual health and growth, but also psychological, and even you could extend it to physical. We have to be aware that most of these dysphorias or difficulties in sexual identity or related issues, whether it be same-sex attraction or whether it be sexual dysphoria or what have you, transgenderism, they all stem. There's the conventional wisdom that's been absorbed without question, without really that much investigation, is born that way, can't change. And that is a total lie. We have to say right up front and confront that. That is a total lie. No one is born that, and when no one has a situation that estranges of God that is innate and immutable, that comes from human sin in the world. And that comes from the experiences a person has. A child's not sexual at all, has no sense of sex or sexual identity or sexual function. We discover that as we enter into puberty. We begin to experience life in ways that we begin to discover what that's all about. But child doesn't have that.
And yet we're living in an age where so many school systems are sexualizing children.
Exactly, and it's horrendous.
It is.
It's demonic. It is, yeah, absolutely. You know the saying, the church is not a country club for saints, it's a hospital for sinners. Orthodox Christianity is about healing. We are all born into a world of sin and disorder. I was conceived in iniquities, and in sins of my mother bare me, as it says in Psalm 50. So this is the function of the church, to heal our brokenness, to restore us to the grace-filled perfection that Adam and Eve experienced as they were created before their fall. So we keep that in mind, then we see the function is not a social club, it's not an ethnic preservation society, it's not earning brownie points so you can go someplace where everything's just perfect after you die. It is, as we understand, purification, illumination, and theosis. And the dogma of the church, the theology, the anthropology, all of this exists to move us into that process. And it's for everyone. And in the church we have the examples. First of all and above all, we have the incredible variety of examples of the saints. Mm-hmm. Reading the lives of the saints helps us to understand how people became what God created them to be, how they grew spiritually into the wholeness of their created potential. And we have living examples. In the parishes, we have married couples, we have unmarried individuals, all struggling and moving forward spiritually, and providing examples of how to succeed in that struggle. And by God's grace, in the Orthodox Church, we also have the examples of the monastics. We have monks, we have nuns, and you and I know that, well, we've been talking about our ministries with young men. You've talked to me many times about your dear friend, Mother Markella, and how she's such a joyful, grace-filled, loving person who cares for her nuns and is an example of motherhood to them as well as to all the women that come to their monastery. And she's filled with love and joy and caring. This is what our calling needs to be as Christians, to be filled and to show God's love, God's desire to have us come closer to Him, and His love for us expressed in His grace that He imparts to us through the holy mysteries, in baptism, in chrismation, in the Holy Eucharist, and the other sacraments of the Church. When we're ill, we have the office of unction to heal our bodies and our souls and our minds too. And all of these things are to bring us to a new state, an elevated state of purification, illumination, and theosis. This is what we have for all people. All of us are broken. As long as we keep that in mind, we have the right frame of mind to be loving. But as you said, we have to stand on the principles because they are not just simply rules and regulations to make people behave the way someone wants them to behave. They are the process of therapy. The healing process has a certain protocol, just as we have in physical health. If we have an illness, we go seek a physician. He follows a healing protocol. He doesn't tell you to do something because he wants to make you do something you don't want to do. He tells you what you can do to be healed. The same exists in our spiritual life in the Church. Wouldn't you agree?
I would. It reminds me of back in the days when I was teaching, and I would go into the cafeteria during the lunch hour break. We had two major breaks for the students. And you'd go in there and you'd see, this was a young men's high school, a Catholic high school that I was teaching in at the time. And these young men would be sitting around a table talking. And when I was in graduate school in Berkeley, I remember going into coffee houses and you'd see stacks of books, and you'd also see young people sitting there conversing personally with one another. And a number of years ago, I was in Berkeley and I stopped at one of the coffee houses that was owned by a Palestinian Orthodox Christian. And I walked in with a friend and I saw a sea of open laptops and texting, young men and women texting, and nobody conferring with one another and no books. And I looked at my friend and I said, I don't want to sit in here. So we ordered cappuccinos and we went to sit outside at one of the tables in the front of the place. And on our way out, my old friend walks in that owned the place. And I said, I'm sorry, but I can't sit in this place anymore. I said, it's changed. And he says, yes, the young man that made your cappuccinos is my son. I just turned it over to him because he says, I can't stand coming in here. And I looked at other coffee houses in Berkeley. They were all the same. There was no dialogue going on. And yet, when you and I were in college, that was a critical part of our formation, was interacting with our peers, sharing ideas. And now we don't have that. But the Church is a good place to begin to return to that day. And that is by getting our young people into organizations, young women into young women's groups in the parish, young men into young men's groups, and have them spend time together, leaving their phones in their cars and actually conversing with one another. And then ultimately, it's during that time of sharing that they are going to be deepening their faith in Christ and their journey within the Orthodox Church, as you said, the hospital of the soul, together. Together.
Yes. Yeah, technology is a very major part of the problem. I mentioned to you just yesterday or the day before Jean-Paul Larcher's book, The New Media Epidemic, which is published by, which is available through Holy Trinity Monastery Bookstore, published by their press. Excellent description of the problems that are sprung out of new media, post-television. So that's something also that needs to be considered. That could probably be another whole program right there.
Yeah, could be.
Maybe we should save that for another day.
Yeah. You have to come back.
God willing, God willing, I'm very happy to be here, and it's nice to see you after 20 years or so. And the brotherhood too, and how your brotherhood has grown, and the kind of men you have here. I'm very happy for you that you have the community here, which is an exemplary community for the men who are not monastics who come here. Your Salish Brotherhood men and anyone else who visits here. And when I'm home, there's more work to do there.
Yep.
I have someone who wants to. I just received a text this morning from someone I hadn't seen in maybe 40 years. Last time I saw him, he was a teenager, a troubled teenager, and circumstances took him away from our monastery. 40 years later, I get an email. I want to come to your monastery and talk with you and go to confession. Over the last years, he went through this, that, and the other thing, including even to paganism, he said, and back to Orthodoxy. So that's our work.
And a lot along with that is all the young people that are that hear about Orthodoxy, both Roman Catholics and people who are part of mega churches.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's even a mega church minister in Seattle that has been known to enter the stage on a motorcycle. I mean, what does that do for the inner life?
No.
Well, Father, it has been a joy having you here.
Likewise.
And I am looking forward, if not back here or at your monastery, at least, God willing, we'll both enter the pearly gates. And then we will have an eternity together worshiping before the throne of God.
May it be blessed. Thank you, Father.
If you have found this content to be a blessing, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.
Both now and ever and unto the ages of ages. Amen. Only begotten Son and immortal Word of